Welcome to chapter 15, the progressive movement. Yeah, we're working. There's the progressive movement. No, we're not talking about auto insurance here, okay? Just be serious for about 12 minutes, or maybe a little bit more. Get your class notes out. We got to go through a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff in the progressive movement. If I go too fast, hit the pause button. Let's go. I know the question you're asking yourself, you're saying, hey, Mr. Spicer, why was there a progressive movement in the first place? Well, you got to think back to last unit. Remember the captains of industry, sometimes called the robber barons, people like Carnegie, Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, Morgan, right? Well, they make a lot of money, right? Now, there's a lot of people, though, at the same time that felt they made too much money, or there was too much of a gap between rich and poor. That's one part. The other part is you've got stuff like dangerous working conditions, child labor laws, and long hours, low wages, bad job security, and no benefits. So there's a bunch of stuff. It's not just one issue. It's a number of issues that come together that make people want to progress society, at least in their view, to progress society. So let's talk about the first group, the muck rakers. When you hear muck, you think of something gross. Well, I need you to think of something that is corrupt or unequal, right? So here's one. Jacob Riis, How the Other Half Lives. He writes about, or he really took pictures about tenement housing conditions during rapid urbanization. So in the inner cities, he's saying, hey, look how unequal this is. Look at the conditions that these people lived in. Our old friend Upton St. Clair writes The Jungle, and The Jungle is talking about the horrible conditions in the meatpacking industry. So that would talk about corruption of an industry. Ida B. Tarwell, I'm sorry, not Ida B. That's Ida B. Wells' anti-lynching campaign. Ho, 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 remember that one. Ida Tarbell wrote a book about the history of the Standard Oil Company. So she criticized Rockefeller for his corruption. So they're muckrakers, they're people that are exposing things. Okay, now, next section is going to be about reforming government. Got to understand, a bunch of things happened. I should be more specific. A bunch of progressive reforms were put in place to increase the amount of democracy in government. Okay, local, well, there's that county commissioner and council management system is put into place. And this was designed to both elect but also to hire people that would specifically work on things for a county or a city, right? Or I'm sorry, more city. Forget that county stuff. So stuff like somebody who's in charge of sanitation, somebody who's in charge of police, etc. It's a picture of Boss Hogg. He was the county commissioner from an old TV show called The Dukes of Hazzard. Ask your parents about it. They might have known about The Dukes of Hazzard. Okay, that's small stuff. Let's talk about big stuff. A referendum. Referendum is on the state level, and here's what it says. A referendum is when citizens can vote on a proposed law directly. So the state legislature comes up with an idea, potential law. Well, when the citizens go to vote, you literally can say, yes, I like that law, or no, I don't like that law. Think of it as you are the referee. You decide what's good and what's not. Initiative. Now, an initiative is when citizens can introduce laws to be voted on by their elected representatives. You know what that means? We got politicians in Richmond, right? And they make a bunch of decisions. They vote on stuff. We can say, hey, I want class notes to be only printed on bold paper, right? That's because that's how much we love class notes. If enough of you all went to Richmond and said, make this happen by the initiative, they would have to at least vote on it, right? And obviously they would say yes. They'd say, this is a great idea. Why don't we think of that? Here's a big one, a recall election. Let's say you can elect your teacher. Let's say at the beginning of the school year, you elect Mr. Spicer to be your teacher. About halfway through the first week, you realize this person is completely insane. I worry about him emotionally, spiritually, intellectually. I need to get rid of this guy. Well, if I was a politician, enough of you could force a recall. A recall is when voters can demand a special election to remove a politician before the term ends. As a matter of fact, that's a really good impersonation. Arnold Schwarzenegger was elected the governor of California on a recall election when you guys were in elementary school, I think. All right, last one is primaries. If you remember from not that long ago, there was a big Republican primary to determine which candidate would run against Barack Obama. And many states used a open primary system where means voters of the party, so all party members can decide who gets elected. Before this, it was all convention, and people thought, the party bosses control these conventions. Primary is just another thing that allows democracy to be expanded, in this case at the national level, all right? Okay, child labor laws. Let's be very basic. John Spargo writes a book. It's called The Bitter Cry of Children. He's a muckraker. He's talking about this corruption, this inequality of that we have so many kids that actually were working instead of going to school. Now, because of his work and the work of muckrakers, laws go into place saying, hey, minimum age requirements, got to be at least 16 to work. Or if you are under the age of 18, you cannot work more than this many hours. So laws were put into place by states to limit child labor, okay? As a result, more people go to school, and we love school. Regulating big business. I'm totally shifting gears. I want to talk about Teddy Roosevelt, okay? Teddy Roosevelt's the president, and like I said, those big business guys like Morgan, like Rockefeller, etc., they are the big business people of their day. And many people thought, they need to be regulated. They can't do everything that they just want to. See, they formed trusts. A trust is when many different companies come together to own one company, right? And that can be totally fine. Or sometimes they might join everything together and form basically a monopoly. So they're like, Teddy Roosevelt, what are you going to do? Well, what Teddy Roosevelt did is he thought that these big businesses should not be able to restrain trade. So one that he went after was J.P. Morgan. He thought J.P. Morgan was restraining trade on the railroads because he was actually putting the money together for the railroad. Don't sweat it too much. Just understand Roosevelt goes after Morgan. And then they said, hey, Roosevelt, aren't you just going to get rid of trust altogether, destroy him? He said no. He believed that trusts were a good, important part of the American economy. He says, I just want to regulate them. So you can think TR, you can think Teddy Roosevelt, TR, the regulator. That's a good one. All right, let's back up a little bit. And go back to muckrakers and the things that they came up with. This happened during Teddy Roosevelt's presidency. Upton Sinclair writes The Jungle, right? And it talks about how gross all the meat was. And Congress responds with the Meat Inspection Act. Now, what the Meat Inspection Act said was that the government could go in and inspect meat to make just that. I mean, look at the name, to make sure that things were clean and there weren't too many, very unsafe, unhealthy practices being done. Okay, so that's one. And the other one was actually the Pure Food and Drug Act. Now, what the Pure Food and Drug Act did was it prohibited falsely labeled items. So you can't say something's totally different than what it actually is. Understand, both of them came in response to the Jungle, but the Meat Inspection Act, that's the one that you associate most with the Jungle, because the Jungle was about food, right? Square deal. What's a square deal? It's going to be so complicated. I'm not Spicer. My head hurts. I can't think of everything. Okay, stop. The square deal is anything that Teddy Roosevelt did while he was president. If you add all of his reforms together, they're all called the square deal. And remember, what was he? He was TR, the regulator. Hold on, one more time. The regulator. Oh, here's the destroyer. You're looking at the destroyer. New Freedom's the idea of Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson will become president after Taft. When Wilson takes over, he's not looking to regulate these trusts / monopolies, the ones that are acting like monopolies. He is looking to destroy them because he thinks that's not the way that the American system should be. There should be more competition, and these trusts should be completely broken up. So Teddy Roosevelt's on one level. Woodrow Wilson is on a different level. Understand that he's going after him a little more. A little more radical is Woodrow Wilson, okay? Now, one thing that he pushes through is the Clayton Antitrust Act. Here's the bottom line. It's okay to be a trust so long as you're not restraining trade. That was in the Sherman Antitrust Act a little while ago. The Clayton Antitrust Act strengthens it by being specific so that you can specifically go after people. The old one was kind of like loosely worded. And then it also outlaws price fixing. So they all can't come together and determine the price of a certain item, like this stapler, right? Also, unions are exempted because actually the old antitrust laws would go after unions because they all come together too and control things. So this is a big win for unions, and the Antitrust Act is not a win for the big unrestricted business, right? Okay, let me roll through some taxes. I will roll through one tax, but let me go through some amendments. Let's try to remember these. The 16th Amendment was passed in 1913, and it allows the federal government to tax individuals' incomes, that means the money that they make, directly. Okay? So now we have a progressive tax. We talked about it in class. You'll learn a lot more about it in government, and you'll actually learn about it for the rest of your life. But understand that Lincoln played around with the idea, and there was a temporary income tax, but you had to go through the states. 16th Amendment allows income tax taxed directly by the government. How are you going to remember this? Well, how old are you when you get to work? We got to be 16. Child labor laws keep you in school. 16th Amendment. You got to be 16 to work. Once you work, you make money. Income. Then you got to pay income taxes. 17th Amendment. It's the direct election of senators. Before this, remember those dudes and dudettes I told you about in Richmond? That's our state legislature. Before the 17th Amendment, they would elect the senator. Each state gets 2 senators. Great compromise. Constitutional convention. Okay. So the state legislature would elect the senators. Many people thought, hey, listen, we're trying to increase democracy at our level. Shouldn't the people decide? So the 17th Amendment is passed, which says you, the people, will elect your senators. Now, senators, S-E, 17th, spell it, S-E, 17th, S-E, senators. Man, you got it. I'll tell you what, suffrage, we'll get back to this. Suffrage is the 19th Amendment. Okay, so that's it. Women voted 19th. Hey, Mr. Spicer, what about 18th? 18th is prohibition, but we're going to talk about that next unit. Let's skip that. Cool. So 17th is senators, 16th is income, 18 is booze, 19 is women. We'll get to all that stuff. All right, Federal Reserve Act of 1913. This is another Woodrow Wilson reform. The Federal Reserve Act reforms the banking system. It forms 12 regions in the United States of America with a center bank in each region. All banks have to keep a reserve portion of their holdings and send it to the regional bank, Federal Reserve Bank, to ensure that, hey, if the worst thing happened and all money was gone, well, at least some is in the Federal Reserve. That's one part of it. Another part of it is that the Federal Reserve Act regulates the money supply, right? So the money that goes to the local banks comes from the Federal Reserve Act. They charge interest, or they can dictate the interest on that money. So in that way, now the national government controls interest rates in the company, all right? In the country, excuse me. The key to the Federal Reserve Act is it creates national supervision of the banking system. Okay, suffrage, last one. Suffrage movement is the women's right to vote. It's been going on for a while. You remember that Declaration of Sentiments in 1848? That was the beginning of the movement for women to have the right to vote. Now, states control elections, and out west in states like Wyoming, Idaho, Utah, and Colorado, those states actually allowed both male and females to be able to vote. Susan B. Anthony is the leader. She wanted other states to take that model. They didn't really. Okay? So then we have a big protest model because people want to get this 19th Amendment passed. Many people, including Carrie Chapman Catt and Alice Paul, including protest outside of the White House. They were arrested for protesting outside the White House, and their protests were the forerunners of the modern protest movement. Okay? Susan B. Anthony, I would say, was their overall leader, though. Now, one thing that happened when we get to World War I, lots of guys went out to fight, and lots of women actually worked those jobs. That improved the public opinion and improved people's belief that the 19th Amendment should pass. And sure enough, it did. In 1920, the 19th Amendment is ratified, and now men and women have the right to vote. That was fun. I enjoyed that. But you know what? There's a war coming up, and I'm going to need you.